Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Be sure to join our network and get involved in the work that we are doing. If you can, please like and subscribe. It helps us build this channel, which serves as a platform to communicate with our members. This video is part of our 2025 annual conference. We're looking for folks to be on the conference planning committee. Please email info@housingoregon.org.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our workshop this morning on how to work with an architect, a best practices panel. So see a good amount of people in this room, so thank you for attending. So today, our panel is going to be led by Stephen McMurtrey from Dream Development, and our four panelists are going to be Briana Manfrass, McAlister, Jennifer Nye, and Molly Culbertson. Do a little introduction on each of these individuals. The kind of background on us putting together this panel for today is Molly and I have been co-chairing a housing advocacy committee with the AIA, and this year Jennifer and I actually brought this idea that perhaps it would be a good panel conversation to have as a group with across disciplines on kind of how the profession has evolved with the changes to funding cycles, the ORCA process, and how it's impacted the architectural and design community, and what we're doing to evolve it. So to get us started, I'll do an introduction here for each of our panelists. So our first panelist is Briana Manfrass. She is the president of Pinnacle Architecture. Her career is a testament to the paramount intersection of affordable housing and behavioral health. Her approach is a balanced blend of passion and organization. Briana's ability to navigate complex challenges and foster transparent, open communication has been instrumental in her commitment to enhancing lives and communities. Through her work, she continues to make a lasting positive impact on the lives of countless individuals and communities they all call home. And her firm, Pinnacle Architecture, has been a great supporter of this event over the years and has done a lot of volunteer efforts to make this conference happen this year. Molly Culbertson is the co-founder of Asset Architecture, a woman-owned firm based in Portland and Pendleton. She is known for her thoughtful community-based design approach, which prioritizes low waste and healthy materials while celebrating local craftsmanship. She has over 12 years of experience collaborating with Oregon nonprofits and has expertly led diverse projects from compact urban infill to multi-acre sites. Her work with Asset Architecture can be seen in two prototype designs for Blazer Modular and are on display in the, it's called the lunchroom, the larger lunch area. Jennifer Nye is the managing director at Salazar Architects. She has nearly 30 years of experience as an architect and a designer with a focus on affordable housing and underserved communities. As the Pacific Northwest regional leader and a key firm leader of Salazar Architecture, she engages residents in envisioning future projects, collaborates with local governments on code implementation, and partners with developers to create thriving communities. She also volunteers on the City of Beaverson's Planning Commission and was recently appointed to their Urban Renewal Board. Personally has been very inspiring to me in my career over the past decade here. And finally, to round out our panelists, McAlister is with Gerding Builders. He is the president of general contractor Gerding Builders, and he is deeply involved in every aspect of the company's operations, from strategic planning and pre-construction to client relations and product delivery. He is known for his thoughtful strategic approach and passion for construction management. Brian continually seeks innovative solutions that serve both clients and teams. He's committed to hiring the best people, fostering long-term relationships, which is a theme that you'll see throughout our panel conversation today, and upholding the highest integrity in the industry. He has been a great supporter of positive architectural working relationships, including design-build partnerships with multiple firms across the state. And leading our panel conversation today will be Stephen McMurtrey. He is the principal owner of Dream Development and a principal at DCM Communities. They are both Oregon-based development and consulting firms specialized in community-based housing solutions throughout Oregon. Both Dream Development and DCM invest in Oregon communities through capacity building to support owners, developers, and public partners for projects with a community purpose. Stephen has always been a great advocate of positive architectural partnerships to make affordable housing possible. So I'll turn it over to him to speak a little bit more about our panel today.
I think I got this one. Thanks so much, Dave. Appreciate seeing everybody here today. A lot of folks in the room I recognize and have maybe worked with or collaborated with in the past, and several of you have not. Can I get a quick show of hands for those in the room that are on the architect or design side of things? Okay, we're in big trouble, folks. Yeah. Can I get those of you in the room that are on maybe on the development side of things or interested in the development side of things, raise your hand. Thank you. That's great. Pretty split. And one other question. I'm curious, are any of you in the room here today thinking about, or your organizations are just sort of venturing into affordable housing and you're just here to learn a little bit more? Is there anyone like that here in the room? Great. Fantastic. Especially glad that you're here. So again, I'm Stephen McMurtrey, Principal of Dream Development and DCM Communities. Really excited to be here today. I think this is an important topic, one that is really important as we think about the changing landscape in affordable housing and affordable housing finance that we see going on right now. Those of us who are on the development side, like me, or represent consultants and represent clients, recognize that one of the new paradigms that we're dealing with and have been dealing with over the last year or so is a shift into a new application process with Oregon Housing and Community Services, which has a lot of benefits, but also has a lot of new terminology and new processes to it, which has changed some of the traditional relationship between the developer, the design team on the architect side in particular, and the general contractor. And those are some things that we want to talk about today. For me personally, in my career, I've been doing almost exclusively affordable housing for almost 20 years on the nonprofit side, also on the public side, and now as a consultant. And traditionally, the way that my projects have come together is usually, I laugh because they come together pretty weird sometimes. It's either through an RFP, or we've said, hey, we see some opportunity to serve this community. I've always been in situations where it's statewide organizations, so opportunity to serve this community. And one of the first calls we make is, what we think about is, who's the design team that we want to be a part of this? And oftentimes that can be a lens that we're looking through from past experiences, like a really good fit, or mission, or regionally, things like that. In today's world, those ways of looking at that relationship still exist, but in the system with ORCA, some of the risks are much more felt on the developer side than they may have been in the past. And I think that's an important distinction. The way we're working through ORCA now is intending to, and I think this is not throwing anything at the ORCA process, but it's intending to try and alleviate some of the heavy costs on the design side from the developer sponsors' shoulders by sort of reducing the expectation on the design side. But I think those of us who've been doing this for a long time recognize that that dog don't hunt. You still got to do it. So with that, I think we wanted to talk a little bit about how does working with an architect positively impact the early stages of the project's funding process, and in particular, I'm interested in, and hopefully we can get into the Q&A at the end of this, we can talk a little bit more about this, but management of design process and things like impact assessments, etc. But with that, how does working with an architect positively impact the early stages of the funding process? And maybe we'll lead off with Jennifer. What do you think?
the architect can bring is really taking the client's ideas, maybe community input, or what we've learned from past community input, and creating a clear vision for a project, and quickly being able to put that to a site plan and get a capacity for the site that's realistic. Sorry, I'm used to being on planning commission where we had to eat the microphone. And I think we really coalesce a lot of information and bring a lot of past experience to projects that whether it's what we're hearing from contractors, what we're hearing from our mechanical or civil, and making that all into one big picture very quickly. Especially the way ORCA has changed how we work, getting the impact assessment in, getting that first step in, and feeling confident in what's going in. And it's not that OHCS is like, you must build it this way. It's the fact that you're entering into a land deal with a landowner or with a local jurisdiction. And that's where sometimes the real burden is coming from. It's not necessarily OHCS, but it's understanding where those important things are and where there's going to be push and pull down the road.
Yeah, just from the general contractor standpoint, oftentimes when we get brought in early, like by the developer looking at maybe design build approach, and they'll come at it with a pro forma, we are not going to always be the experts in the room that fully understand all the things that maybe be hidden below the surface. And so I find it super important to find the right architect to help do even some initial like code analysis, start maybe peeling the layers back to make sure that is this a good deal? Are the assumptions we're making when we're putting together like an initial baseline budget, are they sound? What are we missing? And so, it just really has to do with even some of those early jurisdictional conversations. What should we know about this site? What should we know about the zoning here that we don't know that could impact the pro forma? Because, as we all know, that pro forma gets set so early on, and how we begin to work backwards and make sure we're hitting that. Having an expert in the room to even talk with the local code officials, the city, is important as we're just kind of feeling this out and saying, do we have a deal here? Does this project make sense? And so bringing that expert and then having their knowledge kind of fold into the historical budgeting that we're putting together ties it very, very well.
Those are the main things as far,
just thinking about the costs and accounting for inflation and overtime and how long that process might take from when you're starting that due diligence process to when you're actually ready to start construction, and adding in contingencies and thinking about what those unknowns are, that maybe there's some balance between that initial investment and what your assumptions are to cover those unknown pieces too. So playing sort of the balancing game of how much to investigate and at what time, and more is always better, provides less risk and more assurance with it coming out the way that you intended, and that you're going to have enough funds to actually do that, and you're not trying to do a bunch of EE at the end to make it be a project at all, or find gap funding and things like that.
Great, thank you for that. Fantastic. So, although architects bring the most value when engaged early, often developers need to be conservative in spending pre-development funds in early phases, which we all know is very critical. So what are some of the ways that architects are evolving to assist with these new challenges? Anybody want to take that? Start off with that?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to be intentional with how you want to approach the project and what things are being looked at for them. If you have a site that maybe has an existing property on it, is a vacant site, and maybe there's some historical things that have happened that you're easily able to find, or that the community understands, the approach there might be different than you're doing a rehab or some other type of existing building that you're going into, how you approach that and what your due diligence is. can look different, and being intentional with how you approach that and how you structure your contracts so that there's some flexibility to, as you uncover things or maybe you learn more, that you can provide more services, but then you can also pull back if it's not necessary, and figuring out, as I was saying before, just that balancing between providing the security and where it needs to go. And then also looking for, things that we can do. What are our partners? What has worked on other things? Where's the funding coming from? Is there other partners that we can introduce clients to? Or partnerships within those communities that maybe they're working in for the first time, and how do those partnerships then leverage or make that project more successful? So doing that on the front end. And then I'll pass it to Ryan to talk about some other like design build or structuring that's not just having an architect on the front side.
Yeah, when it comes to design build and having the architecture team work with the general contractor and interface directly with our client developer, really having those conversations up front and understanding how far do we need to get and what level of services do we need to bring to the table to accomplish what we need to do for OHCS to get our submission in. And candidly, we have very frank conversations and say, listen, this is the initial estimate for services. This is what's going to take to get through schematic design. This is what's going to take to get through the initial planning phases. And begin to lay that out and just have a conversation. And we look at it and say, okay, depending upon the client, depending upon the project, is that something that we can carry for a finite period of time, knowing that when closing comes in, the funds come in? Or is there something else along the way where the developer is going to say, hey, 6 months in, we're going to have some funds coming loose, and we'll be able to do a partial payment. And it's kind of like you're kind of walking the process forward with really good transparency and clear communication, because the goal is to get the project funded and get the project started. And so there is a value of service that the design team and the contractor provide through this process, but it's also the balance of how does that get compensated and what is the level of risk. And so we have to lay all those out there and understand that if this thing goes south, are we willing to lay some dollars on the line and say that was an opportunity cost, and what kind of magnitude is that, or how does this get recovered at the end? So I would just encourage to just have that conversation so that you can look at some creative let's call it not financing, but creative payment plans. Because more often than not, if we can look at it and say, at this point, we're going to be at this point in design, can we get this released to fund this level of service? And then there's some pullback at a different duration. Once we get to this point, can we get this released? So not your standard from a general contractor side, hey, we need to pay in 30 days. That is not the way it works, here. It's a matter of how long can we let this roll out, and with the end in mind, what does that look like? And so there's risk, but we work in a risk industry. But we're also looking to say that is this the right project, and is it going to work? So we're not going to step into it and take a risk on a project that makes no sense, or on a client that we've never done work with before. So it's really about building that bridge of trust and understanding that if I get here, can you meet me halfway, or what does that funding look like? So kind of an ambiguous answer, but it's really about having those good conversations with your developer and your architect team ahead of time before you get started, and all of a sudden you're at a large dollar figure of services that maybe we don't need, or maybe the project can't fund.
Yeah, and being a small business owner myself, the issue of not having pre-development funds available at onset is really impactful for MWBSB firms, because we don't carry the liquidity to take us through pre-development. So making sure that we have a plan and a schedule for payments to come in is very important for us, and I hope that there's OHCS or Foley people in the room, because I don't feel like there's really been a collective conversation around what that looks like, even though we're required to hire MWSB firms on a lot of these projects. And I think as a small firm owner, I felt like Briana had mentioned that we're just evolving to do more with less. We're trying to talk very early, be very transparent about what are the needs for the project, what do we need to see to gauge the feasibility of a project, to do a gut check on building and zoning codes. to get us into that Orca process, and that could look like a menu of services that we're scaling back, rather than doing lump sum fee payments. But I mean, the common theme I think throughout this panel is just open, transparent conversations that happen early.
Yeah, I want to echo what Molly said about the pressures that NWSB firms are feeling because of this Orca. You know, there is a desire to hire WSB firms, but most of the firms are small and don't have the depth of their financial security to withstand unexpected ups and downs in their income. And so what's been happening is actually been very difficult for the smaller firms. So having these transparent discussions we're talking about is really, really important. Sometimes we are in a financial situation where we can float sometimes, but sometimes we're not, and we'll be really upfront about that and try to figure out how to scope our services. We're also seeing clients actually take on more legwork than they had in the past. It used to be that they come in and they say, here's the site, you're done. You go talk to the city, you take on all of it. And we're seeing more clients say, we're going to have the initial discussions about zoning, and we'll do the interface for setting up the meetings and just taking on a little bit more of the administrative burden up front, which is helpful. It's all time and money, and it's not that we don't want to do it. It's not that the clients don't trust us, but there's an acknowledgement from their side that they're asking a lot of us right now. So that's been really appreciated.
I just wanted to add to that. I mean, I think what's driving it from the development side of things, and I'm sure those developers in the room are feeling this as well, is that, as always, pre-development sources are really constrained, right? You know, OHCS was great to come out with a pre-development loan, but the pre-development loan proceeds were fairly targeted in round one with Orca and went fairly rapidly, and they're reliant on repayment before, like their land acquisition program, repayment of those loan funds before they can dole them out again. I think, you know, they want to get those funds out there. From all the conversations I've had, they want to get those funds out there. It's a fantastic source because it's extremely low interest. It's no expectation of repayment and until you're getting to loan closing, etc. But there's just, the pot is so finite, and most of these projects, I feel like I'm going to be way too real. Most of these projects, folks, cost a lot more than anybody wants to talk about to get from point A, which we're all having a discussion about today, to the point where we're going to be at a construction closing. I mean, they cost a lot of money, and I don't care if you're in the Portland metro area, or you're in Lakeview, or like me, you're all over the state on the coast, or in the valley, or in eastern Oregon. You will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get an affordable housing project, most likely from point A to the point of construction closing. So that means that the developers are now having to seek pre-development funds from other areas, which is higher risk. And that higher risk is then transferring to our relationship with our design partners, and it's pressure on everybody. So I think that's what's, you know, it sounds very, something sounds very doom and gloom, or feels very doom and gloom, but I think what we're realizing is that new paradigm, right? That we're all having to be, I mean, you don't want me looking up zoning. I don't want me looking up zoning. I want you guys doing that because you're the experts. But unfortunately, those administrative tasks we may have to take on for cost reasons. So it's just to be aware of this, especially for those that may be coming into this new, that this is a constrained resource world. So. Given that, as people are thinking about moving to this world, that they're looking for architect relationships, maybe you've got folks that you always use in the metro area, moving outside the metro area, or vice versa. What are the most common ways a client can find an architect?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's good to start talking about internally as an organization. Maybe you have RFP processes and things like that where you're getting the word out on the street. But also we're naturally problem solvers. So in just passing in conversation, mentioning an idea or a need in your community can stimulate a conversation that leads to a project eventually of being could you think about it this way, or maybe there's different dollars that are being associated, different funding mechanisms that can be approached. So having an open conversation early on that can point to that direction, and then getting towards an RFP or a direct select contract, those type of ideas that then will lead to an actual project and the services that we were starting with as far as tailoring those in the pre-development to get you all the way through construction. And each project is unique, each location is unique, each client is unique, and so putting together the right team that can address the needs within that community and the location that's being served, I think is a critical just component to understanding how a successful project can come of that. Because one size doesn't fit all, and we're also trying to figure out how to make it replicable and efficient and streamlined. So open conversations, and then going through that process depending on your procurement process that allows for and doing it based on qualifications.
Yeah, I want to talk about the procurement process. And when we're talking about small firms and investment, the less investment we put into going through a procurement process, the more money we're going to have to help you implement your project. If we're having to put a proposal package together and then do a proposal and then do an interview, all of that takes a lot of time and effort, because we tailor every one of these to what you are asking. If you have the ability to do direct selection or do a short list and simply do interviews, because to me what is really important is the relationship and how people feel in that room and what the level is of people. And that really comes through in the interview, I think, so I think relying on interview, relying on past relationships, and relying on referrals is really a great way to select your architect, rather than going through a written RFQ process. So unless some organizations have a requirement, and totally respect that, but the less we can spend, the more we can help you guys out.
Yeah, just to chime in then, so what does this look like on a design build process? I mean, as a general contractor, what we're seeing more and more, at least what I'm seeing, is I have clients that are coming out and they are selecting the contractor and then letting the contractor go and select the design team. And so it's kind of a different approach, because typically in the past, design build is you partner up, find a good partner, you work together, put a proposal together, and that's your design build team. More and more, it seems to, at least recently, it's been, hey, we're going to go and select the contractor. Now, contractor, you go do an RFP process and select the architect. And it's like, okay, well, that's good. I think, that's what's out there. I don't know if it's good. It's a thing. And so how do you navigate? So to navigate that is, what we're looking for then is, putting an RFP out to assess which design firm, apart from price, fits the client. And I'll get into more of that a little bit later, but it's like, really, which firm is going to most gel with the client? Because I'm looking at the client and the architect relationship is so key, because they've got to understand what is the needs of the client and put it on paper. I just get to build it. But how we can get that good communication established when we put together an RFP, as a general contractor responding to lots of RFPs over the years, I don't really care for like 30 or 40, 50-page RFP responses. They take a long time. Really looking and saying what top 3 or 4 architects could fit within this bucket that we've, in our case, we've done work with, that we feel like they could best fit. So have them give us 2 or 3 pages of qualification, but set up a time to just sit down and have a conversation. Let's just talk about what expectations are. Obviously, fee comes into it as far as what are the different services at the different levels of design, and that gets evaluated separately. But I think, it is one way that we're seeing that at least developers are coming at it saying, I've got X amount of dollars to spend, go find me an architect, and let's go build this. Okay, so then let's find the right architect that understands the client.
And I think really what's at the heart of this is contracting methods, and what do you want those contractual agreements to be? When you're talking about hiring an architect first and you're getting them on board, we often also then get asked to do an RFP for the contractor. But is the owner developer holding the agreements with that architect and with that contractor? Or do you want the contractor to have one agreement with you, and then they're having an agreement with the architect, and the architect's having an agreement with all the sub-consultants? So it can be, you could argue that there's less paperwork in contracting that way from an owner's side, but there's also could be a different risk analysis there when you're not the one that is in control of each of those contractual agreements and how they get written and how those partners work together. So I think that's something, we hear it goes through phases, a lot of CMGC, a lot of design build, a lot of hard bid, and then you go back the other direction and it all circles back around. It really boils down to how is that team going to come together, and are they goal oriented for what you need, and are those services then aligned with that? I don't think that there's a cost savings in those contracting methods per se. I think there's probably a cost savings, and if those people know each other and get along and work well together and are all going towards meeting and solving the problems that you have and the needs that you have, so that you're getting, at the end of the day, what you need out of the project. And so that can look a million different ways, but if there's a good communication and a good relationship happening and everybody's working to do that, you're going to have the most successful outcome. Just thinking about even just how we structure our fees, and if we know it's going to be a public hard bid, the risk inherently in that and how to align it with an owner versus if I know exactly who my partners are and I've worked with them before, that looks very different. Because there's time spent, there's energy spent in us doing that, but we also aren't building the foundation of lines of communication, and I expect you to write your paperwork and send me an email with the communication. Don't have a conversation on site telling people what to do. We need to actually be there and be involved. So those type of things can be cut out if you have those relationships at the core of it.
And I'll just add, because the referral to find an architect is the top and most common method, but there are databases available through the state. So through the ORCA process, firms are getting pre-registered. You can access that list online. You can see who's involved with affordable housing development. AI Oregon has a very large database of other architects throughout the state. I also like the state of Oregon. So there's a lot of resources to find architects if, beyond, I guess, the typical names that you're seeing on the signs or presenting at these sort of panels and things.
We may have answered quite a few things in here, but is there anything else that anybody would add in here? What quality should a client be looking for to ensure a positive long-term working relationship? I feel like Briana, you talked about a lot of this. Is there anything else that the team may want to add?
It comes down to communication, and depending upon the chosen vehicle, the contractual vehicle, how you're communicating as a team, how you're setting up those lines of communication, how frequently you're communicating, the mutual respect. Who's driving the bus lane? I'm going to go back to design build. Just because it's design build doesn't mean the contractor drives the bus all the time, because we will have a box design and then they'll have 2 windows and that'll be it. We're not good at that. We're good at getting a schedule. We're good at working at budget. There's a time and place for the architect to drive the bus, and there's a time and a place for the developer to drive the bus. So really understanding what is this project like and where are we at in the overall course of the life of the project, the pre-construction life, who's doing that, and then whose responsibility is it to make the decisions. Getting a decision tree in place, understanding what that communications looks like. Are we having weekly communications? What is it, so that there's no misunderstandings, because then that really helps to build trust.
I don't think I have much to add. I would just echo that from the architect side, understanding who's making the decisions and what values they're prioritizing in making those decisions is incredibly helpful. We've had a few projects in the last couple of years really go sideways because the client wasn't transparent about who was making the decisions, and so we thought a decision was made, and we proceeded moving forward. And a few weeks later, they came back and like, oh, we've got to change this because, we didn't have the right input. And it's really costly, and it really starts to erode trust when it happens multiple times. So internally, having a conversation on the client side, and then making sure you're having that conversation with the architect and with the contractors. And when it changes, because the last few years with the bonds, we had a lot of staff changes on the client side, and I'm sure you saw it on the architect side, but when those staff changes happened, sometimes the decision tree changed, but it didn't actually get translated to the architect. So it's really important as things are fluid to keep everybody up to date.
Okay, I gotta add the developer 2 cents here, because we're 100% guilty as charged. I'll speak for myself. In the last couple of years, as we've gone after different funding applications, or we have had situations where it feels like maybe the goalposts have moved. Sorry about that. The goalposts have moved in funding criteria and priorities. It is definitely, I'll speak for myself, put me in a position where I've had to come back to the design team and say, all right, you're going to hate this, but we had to take an 83-unit project and turn it into a 30-unit project, but remember, we always wanted the 53? That 53 is back on right now, but now it's not going to be 3s and 2s anymore. It's going to be studios and 1s. And because it's going to be studios and 1s, it's going to free up some square footage. So we probably don't need as many parking spaces as we needed before. Because we don't need as many parking spaces as we needed before. We just basically redesign this entire thing and make it not cost any more money. Because they're not going to give us any more money. I'm not going to say who they are, but they're not going to give us any more money. Going back to what Briana said earlier, if you have a good relationship though, and I think what everybody said here, and you can be transparent and open and honest about this, we're all in this together. Because if there's one thing that I've learned in the 20 years that I've been in this industry, strictly on the affordable side, is that it takes all of us moving these projects forward in some very tough situations. And affordable housing development can be a challenge. It can be a real challenge sometimes. And it takes all of us working together. And that's why we call you on the next one and say, remember that last time I really made that one tough? I swear this one won't be as bad. So anyway.
That's true.
I think it is. For the most part, you're good, it is.
I mean, looking back to like the most successful projects I've been a part of, there was a lot of goal setting early on in the project, and there was a lot of documentation of what those goals are. So when those radical design changes, and we're just getting whiplash from Stephen about the unit change and the unit mix and all of that, that we're making sure that there's a through line through the design process and through construction to make sure that the populations that are being served, that those crucial design elements are staying in there throughout all the technical aspects that we're having to deal with.
Yeah, and I think having a good discussion up front of how much risk there is. I mean, I think there was things that happened in the last couple of years that were just unforeseen. But there are other times where it's like, okay, we are, 50% sure this is going to happen. So how far we suggest taking a design is very different than this is committed dollars, we're just waiting. And so your chance of it changing then is much lower, so you're maybe investing more time and energy to vet those or take it further. Because once you get to a certain point, you are scrapping it. And there isn't a lot that you can salvage, and so how can you remain in that sort of flexible, nimble state, and then how fast can you get to the end result by the team, the capacity that's there, the tools that we use to accelerate the design process and those decisions after goals have been set. You have a question?
Yeah, can I ask a question? It sounds, I mean, it's fantastic to hear you all as experts. I'm wondering, especially on the GCCM versus the design build, how often, and you talk about parameters, key parameters, especially in our escalating cost. All of us are constrained by how much we can put into a particular project. So how often are you checking in on the pricing? And also, when do you expect the owner developer to tell you, this is my do not exceed? And how do you finagle that? Because as costs are increasing by 10% per annum, it's just gone crazy.
I'm scared of this microphone. Okay. I think it's good to start with a project budget. I love project budgets for that type of question. And you talk about soft costs and you talk about hard costs and you involve the contractor in the hard cost discussions. And maybe your first one is a total gut check. And then as you're developing and getting further along in the design, you're 100% doing it at every milestone, if not intermittently. And I think to the goal setting, if the budget is, I mean, the budget's always a factor. So I tend to not love goals that are like, I want it on schedule and on budget. It's like, yes, everybody does. But I think being transparent with the numbers and when they change is vital. I just had a project that I couldn't figure out why there was such an urgency and push to do everything in construction, to do things like less expensive. We had a CMGC, they had money in their contingency. They were upset about $1,000 changes, but not $30,000 changes. It was very confusing. But at the end of the day, what happened is their board decisions changed, their pressures from the state funding changed, and they wanted to walk away from the project with more money in their pocket than they started with. If we all would have known that, we would have saved so many conversations about like, this budget, we're in budget. What are you talking like? Our contingency change orders are like 1% of the project. This is unheard of. I don't understand why it's not working. And I think there's, building the trust so that you feel comfortable sharing what the true budget is. I think there can be situations where that trust isn't there, and so there is this secrecy about, well, I don't want them to know I have more money because I don't want them to spend the more money. But if we can just have an open dialogue and be like, this is the money available, I don't want to use all of the money available, we can all at least aim for the same goal and get there. I mean, there's lots of ways to design and build and materials, and you can do a targeted value design and get there. Will it meet all your goals? Will there be, decisions along the way? Those are the conversations that you want to be having.
Yes?
Dang.
No, it's all right, cool. Yeah, like Briana said, I mean, I think it's the most important that on a recent project, what's been so successful is we sat down with the developer, said, okay, here's going to be our fee. I mean, just let's get that on the table. This is full transparency. It's full cost of work, but this is the cost of work, but this is what we're going to make. And if you're agreeable to this, have that conversation in the beginning. And then from there, it was a complete transparent of, here's my pro forma. Let's walk through the pro forma. So if they're doing their pro forma, I'm mirroring it on a side-by-side pro forma and looking at hard cost, soft cost, escalation. And so we're doing check-in meetings almost like every couple of weeks. And how are we doing? I mean, what's your latest feedback from the state? Are we still tracking on this? And then immediately looking at how many units do we need? What does the parking count need to be? And getting the design team involved, saying these are the goals, this is the budget. Because we don't need to hide that. I mean, and I think when you have that trust and you're not hiding it, you can go really fast and you can make some really good decisions. So the regular check-in, and then when you have those things where an entity comes back and says, by the way, we're pulling back a chunk of money. How does that affect the pro forma? So the team's already up to speed on what's going on, and so now you're nimble enough to be able to say, okay, we knew we had these different buckets set aside. we can activate this, we can pull this lever over here, we can do this over here, we can consolidate this area over here to continue to keep the pro forma moving forward. But it's really about just laying the cards on the table and all sides being transparent and having a common goal. And then I think for, at least on the budget check-in side, how often are we doing it? I'd say, you know, depending upon how fluid the economy is. I mean, this last spring, I mean, we were doing it like every 3 weeks because, oh, what tariff is today? I don't know what tariff today is, but there's another one today. You know, back in January, February, March, April, May. And so how you're modifying that and how you're tracking that to ensure that the project is moving forward in the correct direction to hit the goal of whatever the close date is and the dollar value. And it's just, I can't speak enough about if we're all working together and pulling in the same direction, we'll get there.
And I'll just add with that question that you had brought up, I think maybe one of the things that you're touching on is the fact that owner budgets also change, right? Like you guys are constantly seeking funding. Your budget, sometimes you think you have money and then OHCS can pull some of that money back and say, actually, like we're pulling some of that back. Or sometimes you are seeking PSEP funding and then you're successful in receiving that and now you can implement a change you didn't think that you could before. So I think this panel's advice is really, you know, your architects and your design teams, they are creative people and they're there to help find solutions. So as money fluxes, rely on the experts that you're paying for to help find solutions. If you say, I have a $100,000 gap or I have $50,000 extra, like what can I use that on that would add value back to the project? I think that's one of the kind of the big messages I think of this panel today is kind of trust. And that I think most any architecture firm that has been doing this for more than a couple rounds, they understand the volatility of the money, and that is the driver. And I think everybody here understands that. So I think we have a couple more questions related and kind of to get the panel out ready for kind of case studies. So since you opened up a question, I did just want to get a show of hands. Are there others that would prefer that maybe we take a pause in kind of our program to ask some other questions right now? Because I think we'd be happy to kind of adapt if there are other questions right now. Okay, guess we'll keep going, Steve.
Let's see here. I think we're into the best practices then. Okay, so what we've done is we've put together some case studies on best practices with the architect and developer relationships, which work best. And starting off, I'll speak from my own experiences. You know, as a consultant working with clients, I work oftentimes with clients, like I said before, from around the state, but many of the times I'm working with clients that maybe are already housing providers, maybe they're in specialized housing or something like that, and they're looking to diversify their portfolio or provide a different option for the folks they're already trying to serve. So venturing into the world of the long-term deed restricted, lease-backed affordable housing is new to them, and so this process is new to them. One of the things that's been most effective when we're searching for design teams in that situation is just really, I'm asking that client to talk about their values. Talk about what are the values of the organization. What are you looking for in a relationship? I think we discussed this on the panel. What are you looking for in the relationship with your architect team, the design team, and what they might bring to the table? Are there any specifics about the population that you serve they need to have? What are the specifics about you that needs to be embodied by your architect team? And then we do sort of this informal RFP, RFQ. And in one case, one of the clients that I work with is Bridges to Change. And I've worked with them for several years now on a couple of different projects. And that's how Dave and Molly and I were first introduced with Scott Edwards Architecture. And that was exactly the process that we went through. We went through just this mini RFQ. It was really a values-based RFQ, and what it resulted in was a very deep connection between the client and the design team on a project that they were trying to move forward, and they're still thinking about moving forward. Again, it's funding, it's process, it's time. again, with a lot of these folks that are just getting into this, OHCS has encouraged new players to get into the game, new housing providers to get into the game. They're just not steeped in what we do yet. They're not skilled in some of these areas. And so when that money isn't readily available, projects like this might go on ice for a while. So having a strong relationship with the architect team that they can maybe come back to after several months or maybe even a year or so is important. And in this case, that's the situation we're in. But it was a very instant, strong bond with Scott Edwards. And though that project has yet to be successful, I think it has a chance to go forward. I always think they all have a chance to go forward. That's why I'm never on vacation.
Yeah, so I'd like to just kind of share just an example of a process we went through a couple of years ago where it wasn't a housing-related project, but it was a crisis center and had trauma-informed design. So an RFP was sent out by a public entity and to select a contractor. It was a very sparse RFP. We were selected, and then they said it's design build, so let's pick an architect. Okay, great. Sounds like fun. So we put together an RFP knowing that at the time, with crisis centers, they weren't new. The regulation is still evolving, but it was really kind of at the throes of what does this all look like and how does it get built. So we crafted an RFP, went out to firms that have what's called medical experience, but also had some kind of ancillary experience, and then had them structure their response to us as far as qualifications and team, but then also your fee, and then kind of set the two aside, because we set the fee aside because we really wanted to narrow down to 3, and then we brought the 3 different firms in and all sat in a room together with the client and did an interview process, and really what we were driving for is connection. Did the firm gel with what the client's vision was for the job? Did they understand what were some of the what were some of the connection points that was there a value proposition? And there was one in this case for this project, there was a right selection, and the client absolutely was like, I really want to work with that firm because there was a connection. It's like, okay, great. So what we did was provide value for our client to begin to build this project, and then being design build, there was an established budget, so we knew we had to back into the budget to say, okay, we've got to get this built for this dollars. But we also sat down and said, so what are some things we need to make sure we set aside so that we are not, we are adding, it's architecturally significant. So there's going to be some things as we go through the budgeting and design process that are going to get pressed. There was a great seminar discussion yesterday about artwork. And as a general contractor, like, why do we need art? I mean, it just goes on the wall. Can't we use it to, do something else with it? But making a purposeful decision to set that aside, set certain elements of those projects aside and say, we're going to have to find a different place to cut because this is significant for this project and this is why. And having the entire, let's say the leadership team on the owner side say, yeah, we're getting behind this and these are things we want to design around or design into the job. And so we really focused on, the collaboration and the expertise, that there was a sense that we could come alongside and do what we do, but then the design team could come alongside and really grab hold of what the partner's vision was, what the client's vision was, to get this thing designed and in place. And so it's turned out to be a great project, and it just was, again, it was kind of unique in that really letting the client drive the decision on who was connected best with them. And by the way, it was not the cheapest firm. It was actually the most well-qualified and firm, and they had a price that matched it. And so it was a good solution. So.
I think kind of building on that, we've talked a lot about trust, and I think that is really the basis for a successful project. Scale 2 projects, I've been on projects where, for whatever reason, the client, we were selected based on qualification or relationship, and the project manager that came in, that the project was delegated to, didn't trust our design team. And so every decision that was made was questioned. And it became a bear to get through. It was hard for our staff to get through. And that trickled down to the contractor relationship. And there was conflict between the client, the contractor, the architect, and the contractor. it was really difficult to get through. Lesson learned was everybody should have picked up the phone much earlier in the process and had one-on-one conversations. Other projects that we've been a part of, as soon as you start feeling a little tension, if there's a budget concern or something, the leader of the team gets up and picks up the phone and says, "Can we talk? Let's go have coffee. Let's figure out our path forward because this isn't going as planned. Things just change." And people have a hesitancy, it seems like, to pick up the phone and have a hard conversation. And really, we are willing to pivot. We are willing to change our approach. We can change our staffing if it's a staff issue. But we need to hear about the issues. And we certainly, if we're having a conflict with a contractor, we're picking up the phone and having an offline conversation saying, you're calling us too often, you need to be submitting RFIs. Whatever the issue is, we're trying to take that offline and not blow it up into something much bigger than it needs to be. And I think building that trust and building that conversation level, at the staff level, at the project management level, and at the, principal in charge level is really important, and anybody should be able to pick up on it.
And I guess with that trust too, it's like we've all been trying to, I guess, like convey up here is that what the value of hiring an architect is. And I think oftentimes when you tell somebody you're an architect, they picture you coming into the room dressed in black, little round glasses, big ego, and knowing that the costs are going to get driven up with all their intentions. But as Dave was saying earlier, really what our value is problem solving. We love a good puzzle, and we're really good at coordinating. And I guess my case study, my example right now is that at Acid we're working on a community building project in Hermiston, and it has one of those budgets that you look at it and we talk about it all the time as a team. We're like, there's no way this is feasible, but we did a little something unorthodox where we're actually subconsulting underneath the firm that's doing the MEP structural and civil engineering as a way just to pull back what our professional service fees are. And that way we can just be sure that we're staying focused to make sure that this building, which has a lot of complex programmatic needs, are going to be fitting the day-to-day needs that the client has. And then going back to the goals, it's just so critical for a successful project because we're starting to list out what are the important design items. If you do get money in, what are some sustainability items that you'd like to add in, some more advanced and sophisticated equipment pieces or some art or design items. And then, but once we get the foundations down so that we know the building is going to work, and that at the end of the day, at the ribbon cutting, we're not all looking around and be like, how did we miss this? Why did we do it this way? Because that's the absolute worst. So much time and money spent to get these buildings built. It's really important. The goals are completely important.
Yeah, so I could have used that one. There's really too many options for the microphone. So yeah, building on the goal setting. So a lot of what we do at the beginning is going around the room if there's multiple stakeholders and identifying goals from the project. And we dig deeper into that about what does the environment look and feel like, and how does a resident interact with it. So on a project that we recently finished in Bend, it's near OSU campus. It was a plot of land that had walking paths, like the neighbors had been using it for many, many years, walking through the area, taking dogs and things like that, and then it remained surrounded by these little pockets of neighborhoods. And so one of the goals was about engaging the community. So often we're talking about what is on site and what only interacts with what's on site. And yes, maybe you have a bus pickup or things like that, but it's not often that you have a goal that's really about connecting to the neighborhood. And so we had an opportunity, and the client was like, yeah, there's an easement, it's gonna have a drive, utility access, and between the two buildings, and it's there's concrete, there's a sidewalk. And we sat internally and we're like, the goal is connection, so what else can be done? And made it more of a plaza with wayfinding that talks about the connection to the college and talks about the neighborhood, and maintained a dog park and walking paths that were on part of the undeveloped site. So going beyond just, I put two buildings on there's amenities for the residents, but what is that neighborhood interaction, and how do they become a vital network with the surrounding community? Because that's really what is at the heart of all of this. We're not just giving somebody a place to, lay their head down. They're going to live and be in this community. So what does that look like, and how can we do cost-effective things? It wasn't like it was a difference in material. We had concrete anyways. It's just, it looks and feels different.
All right, I think that wraps up. Okay, is that better? I think that wraps up the majority of our kind of panel conversation. So we'll open up to Q&A for a little bit, for 5-10 minutes here, and then give some closing notes. But does anybody have any kind of questions to start?
For context, it's a small city who also wants to limit the number of procurement processes. That we also have several opportunities, including mixed use, historic revitalization, and scattered multi-family sites. And ideally finding an architect that is multifaceted, diversified, and has certain expertise, like on the historic preservation side, if we're going to go after those kind of things. So what's some advice in tracking down the jack of all trades?
So I would say that there probably is somebody that does all of those. I think as you get more diverse in the markets that you serve, the less specialized and ability to really do each of those well. So I might make an argument, for the same reason that we're all sitting up here together as architects from different firms, is letting them partner just like they would with consultants. We do it a lot when we need areas of expertise, when we do some of our civic projects. We want to work in our own community. We work all over the state of Oregon, but when there's a project in our town, we also look for partners that have that specialized service that we can then partner with and sort of have a win-win situation for working locally and having an expertise. So I would say you might get maybe two of the 3 or 4 that you're talking about that are doing really well, but then having a partner that specializes in those other areas can be a really great. And contractually for you, I would say it doesn't have to be more complex. It would actually be on the prime architect and who they choose to partner with as their consultant in that aspect.
I think that's a really good strategy too, because thinking of small firms, we might not carry the capacity to do such a large breadth of different work, but are more than willing to and excited to join a team just to focus in on a special area. And so that's a great way to engage with small local firms.
I think you can also think about it as creating a roster, a small, short list of architects that you work with on a regular basis. And then you aren't having to go out on a procurement process for project by project basis. You've already pre-qualified your teams, or at least the prime architect. They don't have to have a whole team set up. But I think also you can talk to other local jurisdictions that are similar scale to yours and find out who they're working with. And sometimes you might kind of give some architects that you've heard good things about heads up that it's coming, so they can be on the lookout, because especially the smaller firms, it's hard to watch those procurement lists, and they only get posted once when we're watching the list, and if you miss it, you miss it. So I think, creating those having some trusted conversations is really helpful. A lot of, anybody who has like a Main Street program has probably a list of architects they've worked with.
Any other questions?
I have to ask this question. How does it, Briana knows.
I don't know,
You
now
know,
I'm scared.
you'll guess. How does a development consultant play into this? And is there a role, a time when you don't need them? Is there a time when you really would be better off?
I think that there are incredible
I mean, there are clearly developers, that have a lot of experience and really don't need a development consultant. Certainly when you're talking about, sometimes a development consultant comes in, even with those people, when they're super overloaded, they just don't have staff capacity, and it is really beneficial. Or it's a particularly complicated project, the mixed-use projects, or there's a daycare. There's some federal funding coming in, and the organization just doesn't have the depth of experience to work with that. But I think the smaller organizations could really use the development consultant. And I think it's a conversation between the client and the development consultant on what their scope is. Because just like us, the development consultants can morph their scope based on the client needs. They may need just specific needs in dealing with OHCS, or maybe they need specific needs in helping through the land use process.
Yeah, I definitely think there can be overlap, and so having clarity on where that overlap is. I think the biggest proponent for having it is time and capacity. So often there are clients that are less experienced that need more regular meetings in order to explain or go into the details or revisit the same conversations, because our language and acronyms and everything, not that that's what we're doing in every meeting or trying to, but there just needs to be more time spent doing that. And I think there can be a lot of value, and our expertise in energy can be spent doing the things, developing the design and moving the schedule forward, versus having multiple meetings to revisit some of the, just to build that support along the way. I guess one other thing I want to say about that. It was, it was for owners and developers. It won't save you from making decisions. You still have to make decisions, and the owner's rep will not replace that for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our panelists today?
This is another kind of similar commentary, but how can green building consultants work better with architects to ensure that uniformity of design considerations for financing and other things are taken into account as soon as can be, with understanding there's financial restraints early on in this process?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've seen as a challenge with green building, especially with multifamily, is like just thinking about the site orientation from the get-go, and how does the unit mix fit onto that site, and how do the buildings fit onto that site. That is critical, because I think oftentimes, we're going from the start, we're doing all these different massing studies, and we're trying to see what fits, we're trying to fit as many units as possible onto a site. And a lot of times I think like solar orientation and site orientation and wind exposure, all of those things kind of get lost in the goal just to provide housing. And then once that's said, I think also looking at the unit design, where are there hot water heater, heat pump hot water heaters going into the unit? How are those venting out? How does that impact buildings next to each other? So early on is better because that just informs all of the different layouts and designs that we do.
I think, from my perspective, I see too often the clients really holding back on engaging the green building consultants until we're in DD and sometimes CDs, and I'm like, by that time the decisions are made. The contractor has done all the pricing. There's almost no point other than they're verifying stuff. Really, to have an impactful decision-making process, the green building consultants would be coming on an SD, early SD. I mean, they should be one of the earliest kickoff meetings, in my opinion. Your mechanical engineer, your contractor, your architect, your green building consultant having the earliest possible conversation to be impactful and to be within budget. Otherwise, we're repeating what we did on the last project. We just keep repeating, because that's tested, it's known, and that's just what we do. So in order to really be impactful, we have to have those conversations, and the right people have to be there. Time is money, though.
Well, we are running at the end of our time here, and I think the panelists, as we were preparing for this today, I think the kind of closing thing that I think we all want to leave, both the development and the design individuals that came to this today, is kind of trust and respect for the teams as a whole. I think we're all in it together to create housing, and even in the best case examples that were shared today, at some point in time there was a challenging conversation, and those happen. But I think that kind of theme of transparency, I think, to go to the question about, where is the place for the owner's rep? Like, where is it needed? Where is it not? I think ultimately it's just an understanding, because as the architect of the design team, often if that conversation doesn't happen, you're just relying on what your past project's relationship was with that owner and that owner rep. And sometimes, like, we get together and then the owner and the owner rep say, like, we don't exactly know how we're working together yet, and here's kind of where we're at. And I think that level of transparency makes it where you can have a really collaborative team for a successful project plan. So all of the panelists' information it's here. There it is. If you want to take a picture of that, if you want to get in contact with anybody. As I mentioned in the beginning, we did organize this through AIA's Housing Advocacy Committee. If you are an AIA architect and you need an LU elective credit, come bring me a card. It does not qualify for your state elective credits for today's course, but if you would like that, bring that to me. And then for anybody that's just interested in continuing this conversation, we do have an AIA set up out there with a QR code, or you can come talk to me afterwards if you're interested in continuing these conversations on how we can get better positive feedback loops through OHCS, better architectural advocates to support any of your independent initiatives on the developer side. But thank you for participating in our panel today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.